Browns fans are going to hate this segment. We are very down on this team, and I'm going to make it even worse. All right, moving on to the Cleveland Browns. Cleveland Browns in 2000 and 2023. Browns fans, if I would have told you last season, Nick Chubb is only going to play 2 games. You are going to change quarterbacks 11 times, and you are going to go 11-6 and make the playoffs. You would have looked at me like I was smoking the highest grade of penis you could find. Hey, you aren't subscribed? You ain't like, follow, comment? What are you doing? Hit the notification button. Hit subscribe, get with the program, so everything can be fun, everything can be copacetic. Why you gotta be so difficult? All right, back to the episode. But somehow, some way, it was all pulled off. Led by their insane defense before they got completely undressed by the Houston Texans in the playoffs. Don't worry, Browns fans, we're not gonna dwell on that for too long. And to put in context just how crazy that defense was, I got 3 stats that I think really put it in its proper context. Stat number 1, their first and 3 and out percentage, first in yards per drive, and first in total yards allowed. So they were shutting teams down. So much so that they gave the eventual Super Bowl loser 49ers their worst game of the season. But now here we are going into 2024. They still have that $230 million question at quarterback, which leads me to say, Dave, is it more likely that the Cleveland Browns make the playoffs or they have the number 1 overall pick?
More likely they have the number 1 overall pick.
I got to say I agree, man. I got to say I agree.
Something, well, I'm going to say something and everybody's going to go, yeah, dumbass. Something's wrong with Deshaun Watson physically. Mentally, we already know something's wrong with him. That's a whole nother conversation that we don't necessarily need to have. But you don't have Nick Chubb. He's a big question mark. They already don't love the quarterback situation behind them. The wide receiver room is kind of an interesting dynamic because when Brandon Ayuk got brought up, Amari Cooper seemed to like the idea of being traded. That sort of goes to what we were talking about with the Bengals of this dysfunction, potentially.
Speaking of dysfunction, they also added Jerry Jeudy to that receiver room.
Oh yeah, let me go pop some champagne about that one. Defensively, they're going to be great because Jim Schwartz just will not allow a defense he coaches to be bad. But I don't know if they can score enough, if they can produce on offense consistently. And that's not a Kevin Stefanski comment.
No.
I think that's just more so the personnel hasn't worked that you brought in.
So the part I forgot to mention about 2023, and Browns fans are probably screaming at the video or podcast however they're listening to this, is the savior known as Joe Flacco who came in last year. and happy enough you brought up the personnel point, saying it's not Kevin Stefanski's fault, because I have a nice little comparison here between Joe Flacco's 5 games and Deshaun Watson's 12 games he's been a Cleveland Brown. In the 12 games Deshaun Watson has been a Cleveland Brown, he's gone 8-4, which is a much better record than I thought he had, 184 yards per game, 14-9 touchdown to interception ratio. Joe Flacco, in his 5 games last year, which, pause, didn't it feel like so much more than just 5 games?
Joe Flacco had a Linsanity Run there for about what felt like 3 months, and you look up and you go, it actually was not that long of a
It's like a little over a month and a half. But in those 5 games, 323 yards a game, 13 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. We are talking about a Deshaun Watson who has not been good since 2020 with his last Pro Bowl season. My brothers and sisters in Christ, it is 2024. I'm no longer having the can Deshaun run the clock back conversation. No, it cannot. It's been 4 years. I'm not doing this no more. I'm not doing it. I'm done. I'm out. I'm out of the Deshaun Watson business. And all of you should be too. Like, I can't believe there's actual conversations happening about this on major networks. Like, bro, what more do we need to see before we just all come to the conclusion, yeah, this is hopeless. We can't keep doing this.
I don't I don't know what the answer is in terms of the Deshaun Watson saga. And you bring up good points. I think he's further away from the Deshaun Watson that was in Houston than I think he's ever been. And it goes back to that conversation about that contract. Because the reality of the situation is Cleveland got desperate, and now there's no way out. So you're sort of trapped with a quarterback that may have irreversible damage to his shoulder. I'm going to say this, I would love if Jameis Winston becomes the guy in Cleveland. That would just be
it would warm my heart.
Poetic. Yeah, I don't know what the answer is with the Deshaun Watson because there's no winning scenario here. No way one way or the other.
So I was looking this up when I was looking for how they can get out of this Deshaun Watson scenario because they can say what they want. They want out of the Deshaun Watson business really bad. If they cut him going into next season, their dead cap will be $136.9 million. However, if Jameis Winston takes over and he does become the guy, he becomes a $64 million backup if that ends up being the case, which obviously is the most expensive backup quarterback in the history of the world. So we just saw the Broncos take an $85 million cap hit for Russell Wilson to no longer be the quarterback of their team, and he's played by far better than anything we saw from Deshaun Watson since he's been a Brown. So it made me think, how bad does this have to get before they at least have to have the conversation of, is it worth $137 million to not have Deshaun Watson a part of this team?
I think you have to bite the bullet. I mean, if this doesn't work, KP, if this doesn't work this year, I don't know how you can justify it anymore. Now, here's my question. Do you think that Cleveland, like in that scenario you're talking about where they decide, okay, it's not worth the $136 million in the dead money and we need to do this move for the best, are they going to be in a position to take a top quarterback next year?
And that's where the bad comes in. If they're bad enough to where they can draft Shedeur Sanders, Carson Beck, the quarterback at Texas A&M, whose name I'm forgetting right now, if they're in a position to draft one of those guys, you have to do it. You have to. If Deshaun Watson's still your starter and you end up bad enough to get a top quarterback in his draft, how do you justify not doing it? It's like, hey, you could be a $60 million backup here, or we could work something out to where we're not indebted $100-something million, and you can go try to play somewhere else. Either or, they have to move on if it doesn't work out this year. They have to move on. But I think we've given Deshaun Watson enough airtime on this show. Don't you agree?
Oh, I've been ready to move on from that topic.
Wonderful. So I got to move on to Nick Chubb because it took me forever to find some type of information on this man because he got hurt in the Steelers game last year. They called it severe knee injury. He had 2 different surgery to repair his medicinal capsule, meniscus, MCL, ACL. His knee exploded, to summarize it all. He was just put on the PUP list today as we're recording this, so he'll be out at least the first 4 games. How will this offense be able to sustain without Nick Chubb for 4 and maybe more games going into this season?
Well, it's not. I think that's the problem and the reality the Browns need to face is I don't know if you can survive without Nick Chubb. You were very limited in your run game last year, even when Joe Flacco took over. If you look at the games that the Browns played, it was Joe Flacco having to make a lot of things happen in the air. And I don't think that's going to be sustainable for them with Deshaun Watson or whoever ends up being the quarterback until Nick Chubb comes back. And here's the other thing. This is the second knee issue for Nick Chubb. This one far more severe than the first one he had. I mean, there's a legitimate question. Is he going to come back and be even 85% of the version of Nick Chubb we saw before the injury.
I didn't want to get to that part of the conversation, but since you brought it up, that is a legitimate concern that the Browns have to ask themselves. It's like, hey, we already have the whole running backs. Are they viable past a certain age? And how much can we expect from them from a workhorse standpoint? And Nick Chubb is not a passive runner. That's not what he does. He gets into the thick of things. And if he's worried about his knee at 28 years old going into this season, he'll be 29 by the end of it. That's what gets it starts to get dicey at that point. Browns fans are going to hate this segment. We are very down on this team, and I'm going to make it even worse. So this defense from last year, we just finished giving them a lot of praise, didn't we, Dave? We just finished talking about how great they were.
We had to find something we liked about the Browns.
Well, I'm about to ruin it. So the quarterbacks they played last year that contributed to how great this defense was Joe Burrow, who they always kicked the shit out of on the first game after his calf injury, Trevor Lawrence, his first game after his high ankle sprain, Case Keenum / Davis Mills instead of CJ Stroud, Clayton Tune instead of Kyler Murray, Jake Browning instead of Joe Burrow the second time, Trevor Siemian, Kenny Pickett twice, Justin Fields, Russell Wilson, and I'm forgetting a major one that I also wanted to mention on this list. Oh, yeah, and Brock Purdy in the rain when his best receiver and left tackle left the game. So is it fair to say some of these stats might have been a little inflated? Not much, but just a little bit inflated. And we may see some regression this year. They have their 30th in strength of schedule, which for y'all that don't know, it's in reverse order. So they have the third hardest schedule in football going into this year. There's a chance we don't see this same level of production from everyone not named Myles Garrett or JOK. That's a very real reality we could be facing.
I think I'd forgotten the quarterback thing, to be totally honest, about the Browns. And that, because if you go back and you look at what ended their season, who'd they play?
CJ Stroud.
And what did CJ Stroud do? He went right at those linebackers that you were just talking about. He went right at a secondary that's got a ton of questions with him. And how can you – I mean, Jim Schwartz, is, as I said, great defensive mind, Mount St. Joe guy, Baltimore guy, love him. He's going to make improvements in his defense. He's going to make better. But, like, Denzel Ward just been diagnosed with his 5th known concussion.
Christ. I didn't even know that. Christ.
That's scary stuff from a coaching standpoint. That's terrifying thoughts to have about that. There's got to be that sort of level out. Like, were they that good? Or, like you said, were the quarterbacks they play? The answer is usually somewhere in the middle. But what does that look like for this Browns defense? Is that a top 10 defense like they were? And no matter who the quarterback is, they're just that talented? Is it bottom third of the league? I don't think they're a bottom third of the league defense. So where does that put them? That puts them middle of the pack, but not good enough to take on Lamar Jackson,
nope,
Patrick Mahomes, nope, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen. I'll even throw Tua in there. CJ Stroud. Can't forget about the Colts and Anthony Richardson. You still have Trevor Lawrence in Jacksonville. Like,
there's so much firepower in the AFC, and we just talked about how the offense isn't going to be able to put up their own firepower. So if they're in a situation where the defense is on the field all the time because that offense is giving them nothing, we're talking about a bottom third of the league defense. Because at that point, you could only sustain but so much unless you're the Jets some way, somehow. You can only sustain but so much before the defense production starts to slip, not to mention injuries and all that. It's all bad for the Browns. So, Browns fans, we'll put y'all out of your misery by getting to the headline of the season. It is Monday, February 10th, 2025, day after the Super Bowl. The headline for the Cleveland Browns season will be What?
The Browns got flushed.
Oh, man. I was trying to think of a clever massage Deshaun Watson pun to get him out of town, but I promised my professor I'll stop making those jokes. So I promised him I'd stop. So just make your own massage jokes in the comments about needing to get Deshaun Watson the hell out of Cleveland, because it is not working over there. Moving on to the Baltimore Ravens.
He got rubbed out.
There we go, Dave. That's what the fuck I'm talking about.